So close yet so far. Like the core of the new glove feature is functioning well at this point. Pretty happy with how it's turned out structurally. Um, and yeah, it's just a matter of reinterfacing it with the networked interactables that we had before. We had these blocks you could pick up around, interact with, and then we had these Bezier curves. So we need that, and we need something of a mesh to represent the glove itself. So I kind of started with that because I thought it would be like, okay, well, I'm not going to do something fancy just yet. But I want something. Like I want to get my foot in the door to then iterate upon. Because we're at that stage where I really should have that going. So it turned out to not to be some quick, easy progress. It turned out to actually be a very I'm trying to figure out a good descriptor for what like I felt like going through the process. It was more kind of like it was that sort of just loop that like 10 times, and that's kind of what the experience was like. So yeah, I was just exploring what StereoKit kind of provides me in terms of functionality. So I started with just like all the hand stuff, like what sort of data I can get out of it. Can I override it? Should we just use the hands that are already there and kind of just manipulate them to get them to work the way we want them to work? Based on this piece of code that you can see me writing right there, and the tests that I ran on it subsequently, and then from that as well, it seems like that will be more work than it's worth. Still back and forth on that, because at the very least, like there's no, like the hands are literally just fingers. There's no, like there's such a thing as like fingerless gloves, but I haven't seen a glove that was just for your fingertips before. Maybe I need to go out more, but so we still need to do something of a mesh for our stuff as well. So it started looking into it. Looked like there's some skinned meshes in StereoKit, but there's a huge asterisk there from what I'm seeing. I'm talking to their Discord now to see if there is some way around, or maybe there's some feature coming out soon. But it looks like I can only really run animations, and that's really not what I'm looking to do here. If that's all I have access to, I might find a weird way to get that to work, but that's really not ideal. I'd rather just do it all through code. I just need to be able to have access to those bones, those joints that are connected to the skinned mesh. You can see me doing a skinned mesh test here, where I just made something pretty quick in Blender, just to see if I could bring that in and then maybe move something around. Because I saw a part in StereoKit where it said like nodes. I'm like, okay. I'm imagining nodes are just like how things are grouped in Blender or like your modeling program of choice. I don't think they're bones, but they could be. So I did this whole test to find out if they were. And as far as I can tell, they are not. So that was disappointing. So I'm not quite sure where to go from here for that side of things. I don't think I can necessarily layer the animations. If I could, then that'd be one thing, because then I could make an animation for each joint to like kind of close in or something. And while that would definitely not be ideal, at least I could get kind of somewhere for now until there's some more features rolling out for it. So I might just have to settle for doing just separate objects where it's not something that's like a deformable mesh that has bones inside of it, that there's just like discrete parts that I move. Which, it's a style that I'm not completely against, but it's not necessarily easier, and it's not very glove-like to have it so kind of yeah, to have it kind of work like that. Gloves are very, form-fitting. So it's kind of, it's kind of left me in a weird spot with that. So I kind of decided to move on for now, and just get the other features plugged back in. And so when I started doing that, I realized there was some weird placement issues with how those features worked. It's something I'm kind of going back and forth on, but I'm pretty sure I landed where in a good spot. I have it saved for later to return back to and kind of make my final call. Luckily, it's a pretty small refactor at this stage. I caught it pretty early, but it seems like the way to go, especially when a lot of how this is being built and a lot of how we're thinking about this is being used. There is kind of a very heavy client-side first approach, and then it's more about being able to share your client-side experience with someone else rather than the kind of the exchange between the two. Mainly because regardless of the framework or library that you have access to be able to make that sort of exchange between two work easily, it's fundamentally kind of a tricky, annoying problem to work with. So I'd rather have it be something I can develop client side. Now I figured out the parts that I want to be able to share across the network, so I can grab those out, share them, grab them from other peers, render them out, done, right? And that really seems like the best way forward for that. I will relatively quickly, there's something I will run into pretty soon here where I do have some data that the server is kind of managing that you interact with as well. Right now, that's not how it works. Right now, it's kind of just a relay. Peers send data up to the server, and the server relays the peer data back to everyone else. And there's no really chunk of data that the server is kind of worried about. Besides those parts. So I think when we get to that point gets a little bit easier to work with, because at the worst, by default, it's pretty straightforward. You just grab the data, you change it, you send up your change, and then the server just takes that change. Maybe there's a bit more to it than that, but relatively straightforward. So there might be clients fighting for a controller to change a certain piece, and then that's kind of where things get a little bit tricky, but out of the gate, there's at least some useful functionality there. Yeah. So the main change I was looking to do with the networking is I kind of saw that there was some logic. As you can see, there's a block con. Kind of moved over to the other screen. But there's some logic that's kind of somehow in the networked section that doesn't need to be there. And if anything, it just kind of makes it more confusing. And you have to route the data in the systems in kind of a confusing way, for lack of a better term. So I really kind of saw that clearly and wrote a good note for that. I want to change that before I implement the gloves, the networking for the gloves. But before I did that change, I was like, okay, let's at least plug back in the blocks interaction, because I want even just a small win right now. Because today was just kind of oh, that's not going to work. That needs to change before I even do anything else. So I did plug that back in. I got to play around with that at the end a little bit to try to bring up my spirits, but still not a happy camper. But some work days are like this. Hopefully they pave the way to better days. So yeah. Don't really have anything else to say.